Welcome in. You didn't find this by accident. This is the Whisper Lounge, a soft space for the conversations we weren't supposed to have. While you're here, you can leave a tip using the captivate.fm link in the show bio. And if you're ready, your complimentary 7-day exploration journal is waiting. Just head to whisperlounge.club/join to claim it and be one of the first to step inside to explore. Hi everyone. Well, today's episode is about teasing apart feelings that we don't often stop to question. And I'm actually really excited about this topic. Is what I'm feeling attraction? Is it sensuality? Or is it simply affection? These feelings, I think, can often overlap. And they can be very confusing, especially if you, like me, grew up without much clear language about intimacy and desire. I also see repercussions of a lack of this clear language in my friendships, in people that I talk to in their lives, just consequences that kind of are the butterfly effect of it, if you will, that happens in society, which happens in our relationships. Today I want to slow down and I really want to explore those differences. And if you've been listening to previous episodes, especially the one where we talked about bisexuality and bicuriosity, you'll notice how some of these questions about attraction show up here too. Let's start with attraction. And by attraction, most of us are going to infer sexual attraction, right? This idea of sexual attraction, physical attraction. And that may or may not be the case in different situations or different experiences that you have of attraction. So that's a whole nother layer, right? Is there attraction versus sexual or physical attraction? I think that's true. But attraction is kind of a pull, right? It's a feeling that draws you toward someone. Sometimes it's purely sexual, that magnetic, physical kind of wanting. But attraction isn't always about wanting to have sex. There are some people, I think I consider myself one of them, who would say, like, I'm almost never sexually attracted to someone until I get to know them, right? There's this layer of like needing some sort of intimacy before the sexual attraction you're even experiencing that. But the attraction can also be about admiration, intrigue, mystery maybe, kind of energy that you just want to be near. In the bisexuality episode, I talked about how confusing attraction was when it came to women. Sometimes, how sometimes I didn't know if I wanted to be close to them emotionally or be with them romantically. And, in that way, attraction can be complicated. And that's okay. It doesn't always ask for action. Sometimes, maybe, attraction is just asking to be noticed. Sensuality, on the other hand, is more about experiencing through the senses. And sensuality is another one of those words where people almost always pair it with sex in their minds. And again, it might be about sex and it might not be. In its truest form, like I just said, it's about experiencing through the senses. It's about noticing textures, noticing smells, movements, the feeling of proximity. You can feel incredibly sensual without it being sexual at all. I want to share a little bit about how sensual dance has opened up a new perspective for me. Not just a new perspective for me on this, honestly, it opened it up like in the first place. I didn't even realize that this was something I was experiencing in life until I started practicing sensual dance. Being part of the sensual dance community, it's a community that's often misunderstood. It really reshaped the way I think about physical connection. When you dance closely with someone, man or woman, and you can be straight or bi or gay, and you're not necessarily physically attracted to them, something else happens. You can feel this deep, beautiful sense of connection that isn't about arousal or sex. And to drive that point home a little bit further, I consider myself bisexual, so I could be sexually attracted to either sex, and I get that not everyone's like that. But even when I'm dancing with someone who I'm not physically attracted to, who I would not, I just wouldn't have sex with, it's just not, that's not attractive to me, right? If I'm dancing with someone like that exact experience happens where I have this deep, beautiful sense of connection. And it's not about arousal. That is really hard for people in my life to understand when I talk about this. It's about, it could be about any number of things. It could be about the rhythm of the song. It could be about touch. It's about scent. It's about moving together with someone without words. It is crazy. It's like you're walking, you're moving these complex movements, and you're moving together with no misunderstanding, and you're not even talking, you're not using words. Sometimes dancing with someone who isn't, your type, quote unquote, still evokes this powerful, sensual energy. But it's an energy that, if I can describe it, it's complete in itself. There is no expectation of anything more. There's no lingering need for sexual intimacy afterward. And honestly, that's what makes it so beautiful. It's self-contained. It is a whole experience. It's complete. And it's an experience that society, I would guess, because I know the people in my circles do, often struggles to understand. Because in our culture, sensuality is almost always tied to sex. If people see you dancing sensually, they often assume it's foreplay. Why else would you be doing it? That's the only point to it, right? Because everything should end in an orgasm. And so naturally, if everything should end in an orgasm, then why would you do anything sensually if it's not foreplay? And that it's got to lead somewhere. But it doesn't have to. Sensuality can simply be its own thing. And for me, it really often is. And with that said about sensuality, now let's talk about affection. Affection is the safe kind of closeness. Affection is the language of emotional warmth. It's, that impulse to hug a friend or hold someone's hand or squeeze someone's shoulder. It's comfort. It's familiarity. It's very much safety. Affection can be incredibly powerful without needing to cross into romance or sex. And affection, I think, is much more understood. Like, I can use the word affection and people are almost not thinking about sex. A lot of times they are just thinking about, giving your child a hug or patting your best friend on the back, or holding someone's hand in both of your hands and looking into their eyes, right? There's nothing sexual about that. It's really about comfort and safety, and that's affection. And yet, especially for those of us who grew up without a lot of touch or emotional openness, and I have to say, I don't know if I grew up with a lack of touch. Honestly, I don't know. I know I have a good amount of emotional touch with my own children. But for those of us who grew up without it, affection can feel so overwhelming that we mistake it for something else. In the By Curiosity episode, I mentioned wanting to hold a woman's hand and walk close to her, sit side by side. Those impulses live in the territory of affection. But when layered with attraction or sensuality, they can often and easily be misunderstood by us and also misunderstood by others. So why do these lines get so blurry? And again, the three things we're exploring are attraction, whether it be sexual or otherwise, sensuality, and affection. Between these three things, the lines can get very blurry and it's very confusing. And part of it, I think, is that we're not taught to differentiate. In a lot of cultures, touch is sexualized, especially touch between adults. If you want to be physically near someone, it's assumed that you want something more. Closeness itself is often, it's romanticized, and especially between men and women. Even emotional intimacy between same gender friends can be read as, sus or suspicious, or read as secretly romantic if it's too deep. Which is, really interesting. The term I've heard, I'm sure some of you have heard the term, we're platonic lesbians, right? And it's this idea that girls can't be really close best friends unless they define that they're not sexually involved, So this intimacy is being confused by the people around them. I think it's important to recognize that in men in particular, men have often been socialized with even fewer tools to handle this nuance. Physical touch between men, that is heavily policed by cultural norms. And I say cultural norms, with the caveat that that's not true in all cultures. But even in other cultures where men may hold hands, like friends just holding hands, and that's acceptable between men, it's still policed. Like, that's acceptable, but not other things. And so, a casual hug, a hand on the shoulder, or even a moment of emotional openness, these things can feel really risky for many men. Not just socially, but risky emotionally. And boys are often taught to associate physical closeness with either aggression, like sports, or romantic intent. But there's very little space, or if any at all, left for soft, affectionate, non-sexual touch between men. And I'm speaking more to the straight men, or to the straight man experience. I am not a straight man. But I don't want that to be ignored just because I'm not a straight man. I think it's worth talking about. But I'm sure it also occurs in the homosexual male community as well. So for many men, feeling any kind of warmth or closeness toward another man can feel deeply confusing and even threatening. There's this cultural expectation that if a man feels emotionally or physically drawn toward another man, it must mean something about his sexuality. It must be acted on, or it has to be denied. And the idea that you could simply feel affection or sensuality without it being a crisis of identity is rarely modeled for them. And honestly, that's just a tragedy to me. And I think it is exhibited in a lot of ways. It's exhibited in, I see men in my life where I just think, I wish I could remother them, like there's just this lack of not only awareness that the need for affection is there and that it's a legitimate need and it's really real for us. And again, I think that we as women maybe don't experience it as much because we're allowed to be more affectionate with each other societally. But not only is it a need, but it's a need that exists without the sexual component. I think men sometimes need their best friend, who is another man, to just give them a hug. And that's awkward sometimes. And that breaks my heart. I think that's just a tragedy. And because everyone deserves to experience connection without fear of judgment or misinterpretation. And again, this is where experiences like sensual dance can be so healing, because they create a space where you can feel connected and tuned in and alive without any expectation or pressure to perform or escalate. I often find myself now being more confident in my use of physical touch. I'm very, as people call me, quote, touchy, and that has often been misunderstood. I can't even count the number of times that's been misunderstood. I love to graze my hand down someone's arm or put my hand on the small of someone's back. And it's not about being sexual or any of that. For me, it's very much comes from a place of nurturing, comfort, and again, just that desire to be close. And I recognize now that the misunderstanding that happens with that is okay. And honestly, now it's something I encourage to happen, meaning I will touch someone in a way that I feel the draw to touch them, even if I know they will probably misunderstand it. Because I think maybe it helps the people I'm interacting with to start to wonder about what that touch can, quote, mean. Explore what it means. Well, she's obviously not hitting on me. Well, that's interesting, but she touched my arm. I wonder what that could mean. Like, I want to encourage that internal dialogue inside of people around me. I remember a time when I was hanging out with a group of friends, and one of the women, someone I had known casually, reached over during a conversation and just rested her hand lightly on my knee while laughing. And it was the smallest gesture, completely innocent. But something about it, the warmth, the naturalness, sent an unexpected jolt through me. Was it attraction? Was it sensuality? Was it just a rare, unfiltered moment of affection? Maybe some of that, maybe all of it. I didn't act on it. I didn't need to. but it reminded me that connection exists on a much bigger, richer map than just friend or lover. And sometimes the beautiful thing you can do is just let it exist without forcing it into a category. So if you feel, let's say, that pull towards someone, or you find yourself confused about your feelings, what if you gave yourself permission to simply notice, without labeling it, without rushing to decide what it should mean? Maybe it's attraction. Maybe it's sexual attraction. Maybe it's not sexual attraction. Maybe it's sensuality. Maybe it's affection. Maybe what you're feeling is a mix of all of those things. And that's okay. The goal isn't to pin it down. The goal is to live more attuned to ourselves. At least that's the goal for me. To trust that I can feel deeply without needing to control it or explain it all. If this is, a topic that's interesting to you, if you want to explore this a little more after today's episode, here are some questions that you might, give yourself some time to sit with. When was the last time you felt deeply drawn to someone? And what kind of pull was it? Are there ways you experience sensuality in your life that have nothing to do with sex? Have you ever mistaken affection for something more? And how did you realize it? How has your cultural background shaped the way you view physical touch and emotional intimacy? Another question would be, what happens inside you when you allow yourself to feel connection without trying to figure it out, quote unquote? Are there spaces or activities like dance, music, or art where you experience pure sensual connection without expectation? Sometimes just asking the questions is enough to shift the way we move through the world. So if you've ever felt confused about what you're feeling, if you've ever wondered, is this friendship or is this more? Or is this touch safe or suggestive? Or am I just craving connection right now? I just want to say that you're not broken. You're human. And feelings are allowed to be layered, evolving, and sometimes complex. The more we allow space for complexity, the less afraid we become of ourselves and of each other. So thanks for being here with me today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for being here. Tip the lounge or grab your free journal while it lasts at whisperlounge.club.